I'll be here to talk to you about recruitment metrics, why they matter, what they are, and how to improve them. I know a lot of you folks are not necessarily in the HR space, so I've kept it really simple. And hopefully, what you're going to get out of it is just the ability to, talk to those recruitment metrics, why they matter, to encourage improvements that can support you. So first, a little bit about us. Some of you probably know we are an online platform that blends automation and the human touch to make recruiting easy. In short, we help our users do more of what they love, which often is not recruiting, which is kind of why we're here today. So what you'll be getting in the next 30 minutes, and if Q&A continues on an hour, is why do recruitment metrics matter? So what's the impact of ineffective recruitment, and how does knowing things about recruitment metrics help you? A lot of people don't even know how big the recruitment industry is. It's a $500 billion industry globally, and that's how big the recruitment challenge is as a whole. People spend a lot of money on it. They spend way more time than they think on it, but they often don't think about ways to improve it because it is kind of often a side of the desk activity. And then what are these metrics? So, what numbers should I be looking at? What are the benchmarks for those metrics? Because metrics alone aren't very useful. And what's driving these metrics? Like what's making, these things take so long or so short? And then we'll talk about what you can do about them. So I've got 2 easy fixes for you, which are just process improvements, common pitfalls to avoid, etc. And then strategic fixes. So what should you be looking at if you really want to enhance your hiring metrics a lot, not just a little bit. And then we'll have some open discussion and time for Q&A. But if anyone has any questions out of the gate, happy to answer them. I'm going to wager we are good to go, but I'll leave it a minute, see if anything shows up in the chat, and I will have a drink of water while I do that. Awesome. So why do recruitment metrics matter? So back when I was at the health authorities doing PMO stand-up, I never really thought about recruitment until we were in a situation where our project was super behind. And I know there's at least one person from the health authorities joining us right now. So you're probably familiar with this one. Project was behind, recruiting was behind for the project, but then the project lights up and the recruiting is just expected to happen in that timeline, and it does not. And as a result, you kind of set your projects up for a bit of failure, or at least a really big struggle in that first part of the project. And it's no surprise then that other organizations, other industries also feel that pain. In a recent kind of overview of a whole bunch of CEOs in North America, the number one pain that they identified was finding the right talent. And why is that important? Well, there's a huge ROI when you actually get a key person hired. So I think Korn Ferry was identifying it's 289% return on investment when you hire the right manager, senior manager, et cetera. When you hire the right project leader or technology leader, or even frankly, just like a really good developer, they're going to add so much value to your organization that every day that you're not hiring them, you're missing out on return. That translates into, over a long period of time, the projections look like on Korn Ferry, at least, $8.5 trillion, which is an impossibly large number to even comprehend, but just way more than it should be. $8.5 trillion in revenue will be lost in 2030 due to challenges finding talent. The talent is out there. Optimizing your access and finding the right people at the right time is really hard. And that's why recruitment as a whole is a $500 billion industry globally. So this is some ideas as to why recruitment metrics matter, because if you want to improve these things, you got to start measuring what's going wrong first or what's going right. And this is all pretty high level stuff. So what does that mean for a specific individual? So this is a CTO that I know. His name's Mittens, and he's responsible for millions of dollars in IT project spend. So rightfully, he's concerned about his IT recruiting process, but there's a lot of other stuff he's got to do. He's got strategic decisions to make, et cetera, especially when the average cost of a failed IT project is upwards of $10 million. Now, these are large transformational projects in the enterprise space. But there's a lot of small scale software companies that say have raised a round of funding. So there's one company I'm aware of. They've raised a Series A. They're trying to staff up. They're trying to find these senior technology resources, and they're simply just not there. Make matters worse, they're not able to staff up a full HR team, improve all of their HR processes, add all these systems in place to expedite their recruiting processes. They don't have a brand name, lots of challenges there. So it's no surprise that not having the right people in the right place is one of the drivers behind these failed IT projects. So at an individual level, Mittens should probably be looking at this a lot more than he might. Effective recruiting matters and recruitment metrics matter because the stakes are very high. They're often hidden. You often don't notice. You often know there's a vacancy, but you're dealing with it off the side of your desk, and maybe 3 or 4 other resources are, but they're always switching tasks. They're not getting the work done quite as well as they could. And it's, creating a culture of not necessarily getting the work done. Vacancies often hurt an organization a lot more than they think they do. So the goal of this one and the focus on this presentation is not so much going to be on things like retention, also equally or more important sometimes, but rather how do you get the people to you and working in the most efficient way possible. So what are some recruitment metrics that we can look at? And there's a lot. There's so many, and we're going to look at all of these. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. That would be crazy. And we're just going to focus on the biggest, most important one, which is time to hire. So we're going to look at a couple of the key ones that drive into time to hire, but this is the one that we're looking to optimize for. And for those of you who don't have your hands full washing dishes or anything like that, I'm really curious to hear what you think the average time to hire is. I know there's at least one recruiter in the chat, and I would love to hear what he thinks is the average time to hire. And I know some of you from Talent Marketplace should definitely know. 2 weeks. Anyone else? We'll just leave it at one guess if that's the case. Cool. We'll leave it at one guess for now. So it's a lot longer than you think. So it's about 45 days. Alyssa, you're about right. 45 days, average time to hire. This is specific for kind of professional jobs. So not necessarily, you're in a restaurant or anything like that. This is kind of specific for the industry that we're all in. Takes about 45 days, and that's from the point of job description. So if you think about it, usually your need occurs probably a few weeks before you finish writing the job description, but for argument's sake, it's 45 days from the time you have a job description ready to go to the moment you have a signed contract. So what are those key drivers or drives, as I've written here? What are those key drivers of time to hire? 2 main things you want to look at, or 2 main metrics: resumes per interview and interviews per hire. These are the 2 key areas where not only are there lots of rooms for small improvements and large improvements, but they're also the key drivers of time. So when you have your resumes per interview, let's say you go out, you put together a few job postings and put together a JD for those. Maybe you just copy paste your old JD, or JD's lying around. It's when those resumes come in, you're getting these huge stacks of resumes. What I often hear from clients is the bigger the stack of resumes is, the easier it is to kind of push it off. So, you're adding a week or 2 weeks just by the sheer psychological element of the size of that resume stack. It pushes your timelines out. It's also an indicator of bad sourcing. So a lot of the times what we see is, especially in kind of more old school organizations, they're just trying to find job boards. And I'll speak with them and they'll go, we use 35 different job boards. We post on all of them. And that's not an effective way to do things. All you're doing there is, and you're probably getting the same resumes from a lot of people because you're only looking at active candidates, people who are actively putting their resumes out there, and not passive candidates, the one who are actively employed, like I'm sure maybe some of you are, but would be open to a really good opportunity if someone were to reach out. So that approach is not really good. You don't want to just have more resumes. You don't want to just have more profiles to look at. Not helpful. You just want the one, ideally, just the one right resume. Interviews per hire is the second key driver of time to hire. So with your interviews per hire, interviews take a while. They're hard to schedule. They take at least an hour out of everyone's day, usually a few hours or more out of everyone's day. You have to coordinate calendars. You have to coordinate with the candidate side too. You're working against other opportunities. And if you lose someone in that process, well, in traditional recruiting, you're back to the start. So these are the two most important metrics when it comes to your time to hire, which is the most important metric in the recruiting space overall. And yeah, the fewer interviews you have to do on each hire means the fewer hours you're spending in interview rooms, which is something we're going to hopefully find ways to optimize for. And actually, a lot of the links that I've posted in the chat are in that vein. So what are those benchmarks? I promised you benchmarks because the metrics on their own are not helpful. You need to know what's supposed to be out there. So usually an average corporate job is going to attract 250 resumes. That's quite a bit. In some cases, we've seen it go even higher than that. Some of the key drivers behind just the sheer number of resumes that people are seeing in this current context is, of course, we're in a time which is improving, but some of the highest unemployment and uncertainty people have seen. A lot of people are on kind of contracts or not in their ideal jobs still, even though employment has gone back up. So you're seeing a lot of resumes as a result. To make matters more challenging, most of the job boards that are out there are optimizing for a number of resumes because that's what they sell. They say, oh, you can reach this many people. So they encourage candidates to apply. So what they'll do is they'll have auto apply features and very minimum restrictions around who can actually apply for this. In many cases, I was speaking to someone earlier today. She was getting in the neighborhood of about 100 to 200 resumes per job posting, and a good portion of those it's not even that they weren't qualified, that was a whole other portion, but another whole portion of people were people who could not work in Canada for that organization at that time. And each one of those, even if you're just spending a few seconds on it, it's time. And time's one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable resource we've got, especially when you're looking at kind of an 8-hour day, especially if you're under-resourced as well. And that's why you're looking to hire. So once you've sifted through all those resumes, you're going to get down to 4 to 6 people that you're going to interview. That's the average, is usually somewhere between 4 and 6 interviews for every one hire that gets made. Now, these numbers are important, but these numbers are more important. So what's the actual hours that you're spending in going through all of these resumes and doing all of these interviews and doing these offers? And I've used some pretty conservative estimates. But yeah, what you're looking at is 31 hours total, almost a full work week on every hire you make if your organization is the average organization. It was kind of a result of this because of all the hiring we were doing that I helped create Talent Marketplace with my 2 co-founders and figured out a model that could help shave that down. And that is kind of getting into the solution phase of our discussion. So this is not ideal. Let's try and improve this a little bit. 2 of the easiest things you can do. One is more specific job descriptions. So if you can get a little bit more specific with your job descriptions, obviously there's, you don't want to rule anyone out, but if you can get a bit more specific with your job descriptions, talk a little bit about your organization, do a little bit of branding in there, especially if you're an organization that people might not necessarily know of, or if you feel that you're an organization that people might not normally consider. For example, you're a post-secondary institution, but you are doing, a cutting edge software implementation. That's the kind of stuff that, is you're selling the candidate a little bit as much as you are making them interested in saying, hey, this is a tailored fit for me, rather than this is a pretty generic analyst role. No one wants to just be a generic candidate in doing a generic job. Like, that's not generally what people are looking for. So if you can do a little bit more get a little bit more specific with those JDs, you will see fewer candidate resumes and better quality candidate resumes as well. The other thing I'd recommend is choosing specialized posting locations. So most of you are probably familiar with Indeed. Most of you are familiar with LinkedIn. Really common places to post jobs. You're pretty much hitting the same pool as everyone else. And if you're okay with these numbers, if you're okay spending, a full work week of everyone's time on every hire you make, that's totally fine. It also requires you to not change anything, which is frankly in a lot of places probably the right move. If you want to get a little bit more specific with it, there are some fantastic groups out there where you will find really unique candidates and really engaged candidates as well, who are actively looking out for the perfect fit. And when you think about what you're looking for, especially if you're a small team, I mean, frankly, if you're wanting to spend 8 hours a day with anyone, you want that perfect fit. It doesn't exist probably, but you want to get as close to it as possible. There are so many, and I've posted these in the chat. And if there's some new people who joined, just post in the chat and we'll repost all that stuff. There are so many job-specific sites out there where, like, for example, AngelList, if you're a startup, this is where you want to be posting. You're going to find people who are comfortable with the risk of joining a startup. You're going to find people who actually actively want to join up with that risk, and they're expecting to see something in the neighborhood of equity in lieu of pay, or in many cases both. And this is where they're going to be searching for it. There's one of these for salespeople. There's one of these for construction people. There's one of these for doctors and nurses. There are specific job boards for pretty much any kind of major profession that you can think of. So if you're going to go down the job board posting route, try and get a bit more specific with it. You're likely to find better quality candidates that match what you're looking for because they're actively looking. The other thing I would recommend doing, which does take a little bit more legwork, is posting in profession-specific communities. So there's some options in there, some examples in there. But there are some amazing communities with really active Slack channels and really active LinkedIn groups where, still the number one way to find talent and to find work is through your personal network. I don't know when that will not be number one. I don't suspect it'll happen in my lifetime. But your personal network is the biggest driver of that. And a close comparable to a personal network is a community-based network. So Product BC is the example I have up on the screen. But there's tons of other examples. There's the Project Management Institute, which there's one in every city. They have events all the time. They have a very tight-knit network. They have their own job board, but where you really want to be is just in the network. Talk to the board members, send them the JD. They want to help out their community. It's a win-win. You probably don't even have to pay anything most of the time. And it's a really great way to find people who are highly engaged with the community and hopefully find that perfect fit. And why are we talking about this? It's to fix that funnel. So, you could reasonably, and this might not sound like a lot, but you could probably bring your resumes down by half and improve your, missed a word there, improve your overall interview to hire ratio, improve that ratio by about 3%, which might not sound like a lot, but when you do the math on that, that's almost a full work day back in your day. Probably. It really depends on the situation. Might not work. It's all a numbers game at the end of the day. If you're familiar with sales funnels or marketing funnels, there might be situations where you post on Indeed, you only get one applicant and they're the perfect applicant. That probably won't happen. So you want to give yourself the best shot at a situation close to that, which is why I recommend getting a bit more specific with the JDs. and getting a bit more specific with the where you're posting it. All of these easy solutions are pretty much free. They might take you some time, but they're pretty much free solutions for this problem. The other alternative is you could really fix this problem. So first, I'll speak to this. So there are some great organizations in I'll just pick on Vancouver because I think most of you folks are from the city. Clio is one example. Hootsuite is another example. EA is another example that have extraordinarily robust recruitment teams. Amazon, yet another example. They have teams of tens, if not dozens, of recruiters. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on just marketing specifically to candidates. They have all the top of the line applicant tracking systems, so they can deal with huge volumes of candidates coming in, and a ton of automation that helps them go through that process of screening those candidates a lot quicker. That's obviously the goal. We want to do everything in-house. I think that's just like a natural bent for a lot of people, not for me personally. And frankly, it's probably beyond the scope for a lot of organizations. Most organizations, up until they reach a certain enterprise level, they're probably going to have one or two HR people who are HR generalists. They're doing everything under the sun. And for those people, especially if there's a big ramp up, support may be necessary. Historically, recruitment agencies service that niche. So you'll save, a couple weeks on your hiring cycle because these are specialists who are solely focused on finding you candidates. They've got a big database of candidates that they'll call on and see if they're a fit for you. But they're going to charge you probably 20 to 30% on average markup on that hire. So for a 100K resource, you're looking at, 20, 30K. I picked 100K because I'm not very good at math and Steve is on mute. But that's recruitment agencies. It is an option. And if you're in a pinch and you need to hire people, I highly recommend them. There's some fantastic recruiters on there. I think one of them's on the call right now. They're really great and they can work. They're expensive, but if you're in a pinch, work with as many as you can and just try and find that person. Because thinking back to the cost of not having that person in place, the value is there. And for the work they do on talking to all these people, unless you want to build out all that software and that team internally, this is probably a good move. About 10, 15 years ago, alternatives to recruitment agencies started popping up. They started with these non-curated marketplaces. And actually, I'm going to do something dangerous. I'm going to try and actually show you some of those now. Freelancer. So this is one example, which is Freelancer. So Freelancer enables you to hire any freelancer for any job. It was really effective. It's a much more efficient way of finding and hiring talent. And it's used by some major organizations. But what I will say is, in general, if they're using this company to find and hire people, they're probably only doing so for short-term jobs. So, for example, if you're looking for something more long-term, this probably won't be a fit for you. But if you're just looking for someone to fill a need, they're a really good option. So that's Freelancer and Upwork. They're both effectively the same tool. Really good option, short-term work. And we've used it before, and we were able to turn around a candidate in the span of about a week and a half. Compare that to 45 days, that's a huge difference. But I would never have used it to hire a full-time person. And we only had to interview, we had to do all the interviews ourselves, but I think we only interviewed 2 or 3 people to find the right person for it. The other option, which is a newer option, probably only been around for the last 6, 7, 8 years, are organizations like ourselves and organizations like Vettery. VanHack is another one. Hired.com was another one. Underdog.io. I'm a big fan of these ones, as you can see, because they blend the automation that we had in these recruitment or these non-curated marketplaces with the human element to curate those talent pools of a recruitment agency. And the results on that is you kind of get the best of both worlds without the extremely high cost of a recruitment agency. You get something that's still more expensive than a non-curated marketplace, still definitely more expensive than doing all this job description stuff and going to these sites yourself. But an option for you if you want to see these cut down. I do have some examples of what that looks like. I'll just show two of those metrics really quick. So we did a case study with one ERP consultancy. They were hiring one talent pool from us. So one kind of person, they hired 4 people. We reduced their interview to hire ratio by just over half. So that's a lot of time back in their day based on how many people they'd have in those interview rooms, about 58 hours in 6 months back in people's calendar. And in terms of resumes and profiles they were looking at, half of the profiles they spent time looking at, they would go on to interview. Previously, it was closer to 7% of all of the resumes that they got, they would actually go on to interview. So when we think about that in terms of hours, that's a ton of hours on time saved. And just to kind of wrap this up so that we can ask questions or discuss or get out in the sun, whichever you prefer. These curated marketplaces, non-curated marketplaces, recruitment agencies, or investing in your own house recruitment team will greatly improve your time to fill. And although the cost can be high and it is a bit of a challenge for a lot of people to think long-term on these things, the benefits are there. There are tons of metrics out there that you can track, turn into hours like I've done here, and then turn into dollars that can help you push internally for improvements within your recruitment cycle and looking for some of these other options. Just last thing, improving that overall time to hire means you're spending more time delivering. And that is all for me. Actually, I'll just sit on this slide while I go to Q&A. Any questions from the group here? Take another sip of water while I wait. Sounds quiet, which either means someone's on mute and talking, or everyone wants to get it back out in the sun. Either is totally fine by me. But Sandra, why don't you hop in there and see?
Yeah, for sure. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. If you guys do have any questions, you guys can feel free to email us either at info@talentmarketplace.ca or directly Qaid at talentmarketplace.ca. But yeah, thank you so much for this presentation, Qaid, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Please stay tuned for more information on our May event, just by keeping up to date with our social media pages on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have any other questions, like I mentioned, feel free to stay behind or just shoot us an email. Again, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the sun.